Welcome to today's InfoShare from the EU Liaison team here at GÉANT. The agenda for today is roughly going to be split into 3 different blocks. First, we're going to have Edith Herzog talking to us about the multi-annual financial framework, Next Generation EU and Resilience and Recovery Fund, and the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement. I will then cover the announced Data Governance Act, and the InfoShare will be rounded off by Licia, who will be talking to us about connecting services, building trust, and empowering students with eIDAS. This meeting is recorded, and it's a regular part of the GÉANT InfoShare series, so this content will be available online on the GLAD website at the end of the shortly after the end of the InfoShare. So with not much more to state, I think we can start with Edith's part of the presentation. Edith, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I'd like to start with the fact that when we plan the InfoShare, we hope that the MFF will be already kind of adopted, which is not yet the case. But we are getting sooner or later there, and I'd like to give a small update on that one. Also in connection to the Next Generation EU and to the trade agreement with UK. We can go to the slide immediately for the first slide. I think that we can go to the next one immediately because this you already mentioned the agenda. So let's start with the multi-annual financial framework. I introduced this slide in January to the board already. The only thing I did change, of course, this is the MFF, which is still open, and it was about to finish earlier. Yeah, so we are definitely in the huge delay. Now the latest delay is until end of April. Yeah, because the Parliament will be able to vote only in the April session on the 3rd week. And this is exactly coincides with the week of the European Commission work program publishing. Normally, it should come in the order that the MFF first and then the Commission work program. And now it seems that they will come absolutely parallel with the condition, of course, that no deadline of any call can be earlier because no payment is possible until all the legislation is published. But it also can be that finally the publication of the European Commission will be delayed 1 or 2 weeks due to the delay of everything else. So the delay originally was due to the Brexit agreement, and now it's also connected a bit because the European Union countries, the EU27, is not ready to ratify the PCA before end of March. There is a delay there too, and the delay is at the moment until end of April. This is for the Horizon Europe. Horizon Europe is a bit better than the other legislations, budgetary lines which are important for GÉANT, for instance, the CEF. I'd like to say that in the CEF, there are still major discussion points, so there is no agreement achieved. These are mostly connected to the transport, except one, which is important also for the NRENs outside of the European Union. In the CEF digital part, there is the open discussion with very tense debate, actually, that what should happen to those countries, those third countries who are not ready to respect the European values. It's first and most about China, of course, but anyway, it's about the third countries because the legislation has a general terms. So it's yet open. Hopefully by end of April it will be done, and the cohesion fund is yet open. Yeah, so many other. The biggest problem, looking all the 100 budget lines, is the agriculture. And while we think that the agriculture is the least important for GÉANT and for the NRENs, in practice, the tense between the two camps in the agriculture debate, that how much money has to go to the traditional agriculture and how much have to go to the digitization of the sector, and therefore, of course, the agriculture data itself. Yeah, so this is the status. Hopefully, by end of April, we will be ready. And then I will make a detailed analysis for all the budget lines, what is in for the NRENs and for GÉANT. We can go to the next slide. The Next Generation and Recovery and Resilience Facility, so it's not fund, its official name is facility. we are at the stage when the national plans are discussed with the European Commission. The European Commission, each DG, also DG Connect, established the help desk to help those who have some questions regarding the national plan. What is important that now the Commission agreed that they will support the projects which are multi-country projects considered as a priority. Therefore, it's important for GÉANT and for the NRENs that maybe to go for the second round of the national plan by 15th of October this year. There is something that the NRENs and GÉANT could do together to get up to the priority by the Commission selecting criteria in the second round. Yeah? As you remember, the recovery resilience facility distribution happens in 3 steps. So the first is already almost ready by 15th of April. The Commission have to get all the plans, and the first payment has to be by June. But the next round in 15th of October is an opportunity, as well the third round, which will be on the 15th of October of next year. And then the Commission has 6 months to negotiate before announce it in 15th of April each year. Yeah, so it's more about the preparation already and thinking something together about the second round. Yeah? And we have some idea. You have some ideas, I know. Yeah, thank you. We can go to the next slide. The Brexit deal. As I said, here is the most important that the specialized committee will start the work. Yeah, so it will be a serious 4 times a meeting. There is a specialized committee for research, so we will follow these negotiations, of course. But the first and most important criteria that the treaty, as agreed, is ratified. It was done at the UK side, but it was not then done in the European side, and the new deadline is end of April. Thank you. Sorry, what I'd like to say here, we can go to the next slide. So why it is important, we can go to the next slide, Hendrik, sorry. Yeah, because the Horizon Europe for the international cooperation in field of research to sign the association partnerships, we would know exactly about the European Economic Area, the neighborhood countries, the third countries with associated agreements foreseen. And because the Brexit ratification is delayed, they wish to wait because UK is not part of the European Economic Area, is not part of the neighborhood countries. It's a third country, but with the special associated agreements foreseen. And the details have to show this difference. Yeah, so the European Commission and the European Parliament and the Council are working at the moment to find a formula where UK can be differentiated from the strategic importance of European Economic Area and neighborhood countries cooperation, but it will be not the same as the normal third country criteria. So due to the ratification, it's also delayed. That's what I'd like to say in this very moment. We can go to the next slide. So what is the relevance for GÉANT? Of course, for us, the most important, or for you, the most important is the FFPA under the Horizon Europe work program. It is definitely in the Commission work program. As far as we understood, the call will be out on the end of April with quite a short time to respond, namely by 15th of June. Why? Because due to the changes and due to the huge workload the Commission has, it's better to come before the summer holiday starts and pass the most difficult administrative steps inside the Commission before the summer holiday. So it's actually difficult challenge for GÉANT and for the NRENs to agree all the things you need to agree. But otherwise, it's very beneficial for you to go in the first round and do not be stuck later in the traffic jam when all the projects are coming in July, August, September, and due to the holiday season, they will be all on the table of EU officials. Yeah, so actually, this is really a good news that you can be in the first round if the deadline will be around. Then the Euro HPC CEF call, which is also very interesting for many of you. As I said, the CEF regulation is yet open, so it's a bit of question. Originally, the plan was to do it by June, and now the plan is to do it definitely in this year. And it probably means that again, the preparatory time to create the consortia and respond the call will be shortened as much as legally possible. Yeah, so my advice would be that you prepare as much as can for this call. And of course, we have the EOS competitive course. We discussed it today morning, I think, in the EOS sessions. I'm not going into that. And then we have all the other programs in the work program, like a space or international cooperation, the Eastern Partnership, and the neighborhood cooperation with the different regions, the West Balkan, etc. So I think that we have a stake why it is important for GÉANT. We can go to the next slide. What is the risk if there is a delay? Of course, the biggest risk that the EU-UK scientific cooperation is not ready. Likelihood is low. Impact, GÉANT has a safe position because GÉANT sorted out. So GÉANT itself is not a UK-based company anymore. It's an Amsterdam-based company affiliated to the UK. The ratification is too big to fail, so I think that the likelihood is very low. But the impact, if in the case it happens, the ratification either of the MFF or ratification of the UK treaty, then of course it's a huge impact for everyone. Risk related to the projects, we do not know because the texts are not ready. And regarding the UK, what is important for the UK, that we have to be on the protocol 1 list between the EU and the UK. But at the moment we are, so I hope it will stay. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. I'd like to drive the session to Hendrik, and I'd like to call your attention that while in the past GÉANT was not really subject of legislation at the EU level because research is not a policy-driven but the program-driven subject in the EU, it will change. We have several legislation packages in the pipeline related to data, relating to climate, relating to digital security, and especially the ownership of data for the private data and the hybrid data sets, which will impact GÉANT. So in the next slide, I collected all the legislations which are foreseeable for 2021. We can go to the next slide. This is my last slide, by the way. I hope that it's interesting for you. We collected it all. So the strategy for Europe Fit for Digital Age will remain with us. This is the blue light. The European strategy for data, I colored it with the different kind of blue. And the legislation connected to the strategy data is at the moment three legislations: the Data Governance Act, which we will discuss soon, the Data Market Act, which is very much about the platforms. So it's very much about the GAFAM, the Google, Amazon, Facebook, etc. So the big platforms who are a bit out of the legislation, and the Digital Services Act, which we are not talking today. We will discuss the Governance Act later. And then there are other set of directives which come under the Security Union. Namely, there is a legislation already published on the critical entities, the critical infrastructure. Parallel, there is a directive, what is called the NIS2 directive about the network security. And the third one, which will come later this year in the third quarter, the European eID, which we discussed today a bit because Licia is here with us. I'm not sure if later the NRENs or the team wish to get the InfoShare on the security directives. I think it's quite a complex issue, and maybe it's a worth to have an InfoShare later on this one. Yeah, and with this, I'd like to turn the floor to Hendrik, who will speak in detail about the Data Governance Act. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Edith. Before I start, does anybody have any questions for Edith? Okay. If not, then I will take us through the Data Governance Act. Important thing to know about the Data Governance Act is that it is stemming from the overarching European data strategy, which first appeared last year. But it's also important to be reminded that since 2014, the Commission has slowly and in different steps decided to legislate to develop a more data agile economy. So we had the regulation on the free flow of non-personal data, the first Cybersecurity Act, Open Data Directive, GDPR, of course. And in 2018, the Commission presented a artificial intelligence strategy for the first time, and a high expert level group was associated with that and set up, presented in February 2020. But the European data strategy, which was released last year and is coming in with the new Commission cabinet of Ursula von der Leyen, has three aims which are of note. Firstly, to create a single European data space, or a genuine single market for data, where personal as well as non-personal data, including confidential data, are secure. And this will make it easier for businesses and public authorities to access an almost infinite amount of high quality data to boost growth and create value while reducing the carbon footprint of the EU economy, and to capture the benefits of better use of data, including greater productivity in competitive markets, but also improvements in health and well-being, environment, transparent governance, and convenient public services. This is a illustration which we have shown in a few EU Liaison Infoshares, but we like it quite a lot because it really shows the vision of the European Commission over the next 5 years. And when you hear the wording of the European data lake, there is your lake. And what we have, or what the European Commission perceives to be within this lake, which is essentially a large interoperable data space in Europe, which is still being developed conceptually and through legislation, are these different areas which comprise of the lake. So we have national, private and public data and EOSC, which is termed within the lake, but then more specifically, we have something called the 9 common European data spaces, which are essentially different areas where we have industrial, green data, and it's important to note that for the Green Deal data space, that's where the Copernicus and the Earth observation data and other space initiatives will also go in, because they will help with the fight against climate change and how to use data from that space. There's going to be mobility data space, health, finance, energy, agricultural data spaces for public administrations, and a skills data space. And these are the 9 common European data spaces which the European Commission is keen to set up in order to create the European data lake, but this will also facilitate the digital single market as a whole. So for the Data Governance Act itself, it was released in Q4 of last year, and it's the first set of measures announced in the 2020 European Strategy for Data. So there will be other measures further articulated from the original strategy, but this is one of the first ones. And the instrument aims to foster the availability of data for use by increasing trust in data intermediaries and by strengthening data sharing mechanisms across the EU. The instrument would address the following situations: making public data available for reuse in situations where such data is subject to rights of others, sharing of data among businesses, allowing personal data to be used with the help of personal data sharing intermediary designed to help individuals exercise their rights under GDPR, and allowing data use on altruistic grounds. But that's quite a lot of wording, but how does the EU Liaison actually see this legislation in a more simpler form? Well, we see it really attempting to do 2 things. That's firstly, it's setting up the rules to enable a data market where companies can effectively trade data. But secondly, to enlarge the pool of data available in Europe for research and development and innovation purposes. So, as touched upon earlier, both are essential for the realization of the European data lake and the 9 common data spaces. However, GÉANT, and this is also what we touched upon in our consultation response, which we shared with members on the 25th of January, because this proposal is still in its infancy and it has to go through the European Parliament and the Council, and there's a consultation period. There's a lot of open questions, which we're going to dive into a little bit more now. And one of those is we're looking for more clarity regarding the second aim, as pooling of this data for research and development purposes is at the conjunction of the European research area and the internal market. So data as a commodity already exists in two different sets of legislative environments, at least, and that's within the European research area and the internal market. The European research area doesn't have as much legislation compared to the internal market because they're originally set up for very different aims. And the challenges to the Act exist is defining ownership after pooling and essentially after the data product is marketed. It would be problematic to see internal market rules apply as public research itself can't be marketed. But if this area was to fall under the European research area rules, then could companies use such data for research and development purposes, or would it provide an uncompetitive advantage? To conceptualize it a little bit, we have these two different legislative areas. We have the single market on the right and the ERA on the left. Both were established in the Treaty for the Functioning of the European Union in different areas. The ERA is based on European and member state shared competence, and it's driven by excellence. It's mostly based on projects, and it's not for profit, or if there are companies in there, it's for the general public interest. Whereas if you compare that to the single market, this is still shared competence between the EU and member states, but it's driven by competition, and it's based mostly in the private sector, and it's designed to be profitable. So where does this new data space, which has different characteristics feeding into one area, where does it really sit? Well, that's where the challenge is, and it's still not entirely clear to us or many stakeholders involved in this area how it will eventually work. But the Data Governance Act is attempting to start this. And if you look at the illustration here, we have the single market on the right and the ERA on the left, but we have three challenges. And that's data isn't a separate sector listed under the Treaty for the Establishment of the European Union. So it's already, it's not regulated for data in itself. Research data is not under the internal market rules, and sensitive data belongs to member state sovereignty. So this is just the beginning of the questioning here as to how will this marketplace as such function in a legal way. So one thing that the Governance Act is looking to do is set up something called competence bodies. And there will be competent bodies acting as data altruism organizations who will operate in a non-for-profit basis. There will be specific rules in place for such a designation, but moreover, one or more competent authorities will be designated per member state with a union-wide register of such organizations. And the aim of this is to allow cross-border data sharing with data repositories feeding from multiple member states. So, of course, early days, but we did, EDIT especially did a quick SWOT analysis and of how applicable or eligible NRENs would be to be these competence bodies. And as normal, it depends on the member state. It depends on the NREN in question. It's very hard to make sweeping statements about something this early on in the process, but it's possible that NRENs could receive a mandate to be a competent body in supporting public sector bodies in the field of education and research to make the given data sets available. You could interpret this as a threat because the government or relevant ministry could decide to do so and therefore may confer additional tasks on the NRENs which fall out of its traditional mandates or its area of work. And this brings about several questions. Can NRENs determine if they fall under the regulation? And at this slide set, which we'll make available, in the annex, we actually have the wording from the legislation as to what a competence body will have to be, the criteria would have to meet to make that. And then the second question is, could NRENs handle such obligations? If a public sector body is not to make such data available, is the technical and administrative arrangement possible, or within the NRENs mandate? And NRENs have different mandates in different member states, and it's not a very easy question to answer at this stage. And the second aspect, which we think is relatively interesting, which is being established in the proposal from the Commission, is the establishment of a European Data Innovation Board. And the EC will establish this board, which is aiming to be an expert group to advise, among other things, on cross-sectoral data sharing, technical specifications, standardization, and interoperability. So NREN or GÉANT representatives would be suitable candidates to the board because the technical underpinning of the business to consumer and business to business market part of the data side, we're thinking is more within the area of Gaia X or its national hubs and the IPCEI on Cloud Federation. And the underpinning network for public administration is Testa. So these names which we're used to hearing will actually have expertise to give to this board, depending on the sector. But if there is going to be a underpinning network for the research within this board to give advice onto how the governance of the data lake and the 9 spaces could develop, then the research voice would surely come from a interoperability point of view from NRENs and GÉANT, if it's going to be based on the e-infrastructure side of things. And I think that is the end of the Data Governance Act. I'm here if you have any questions before I hand over to Licia. And Edith, I'm not sure if you have anything else to add on this legislation.
Maybe only the news from today that the Portuguese presidency is very much pushing for accelerating this legislation. So they have already the first ministerial meeting very soon. And we have to be aware that this regulation will be crucially important for the data lakes and therefore for your HPC network, to the terabit network. So I advise to everyone to read it carefully and to understand the abbreviations if it is applicable for the NREN you are in, because it could be very different for the different NRENs.
Thank you. And also don't forget to, if you didn't read it, it might be of interest for you to read the position statement we sent in on the Data Governance Act, which we sent to the GA NRENs mailing list in January. So which pretty much conveys our initial observations of the proposal. But if there are no further questions, I think I will stop sharing my screen and hand over to Licia.
Hi, hello everybody. Hendrik, I'll share my screen then, so I project my slides, so I don't have to disturb you to ask for the next one. Can you see this?
Not yet.
Not 1 second. Let's come in. Sometimes you need some thinking.
Yeah, yes, we do now.
Thank you. Great. So thank you very much for having me here. Before I start, let me start with a disclaimer. I will tell you, I will present to you the work that we are doing to achieve interoperability between EduGAIN and eIDAS. However, I'm in no form or shape an expert of eIDAS, but I will tell you what we have learned from over the years in various attempts to interact with them. So there are two existing authentication and authorization infrastructures that are both funded by the European Commission. Funding are different, they are deployed in different ways, but as a matter of fact, the route for the funding is pretty much the same. One, you are very much familiar with that because you are in fact enabling that by operating your national Research and Education Identity Federation, and that is EduGAIN. And what does EduGAIN do? Enables federated access to services that are operated nationally for the benefit of the international community that participates in EduGAIN. The service is production since 20. It's basically in production for 20 years. This marks, and actually this should have been 2001, so that's my mistake. And in fact, we will be celebrating, and you will see some announcement in the coming months about the anniversary of EduGAIN. The other one is eIDAS. There's been a lot of discussion about eIDAS. This is basically the counterpart to enable secure and seamless electronic transaction between business, citizens, and public authorities across European borders. This is in line with what Hendrik presented to enable the digital single market vision, to facilitate the electronic way to, the electronic really transaction to facilitate access across border of all kinds of services. eIDAS started pretty much in the same time of EduGAIN, maybe a few years later, but it's been around for quite some time. What is exactly, I will focus more on eIDAS because I think this is the more relevant part for this webinar. eIDAS stands for Electronic Identification, Authentication and Trust Services, and it is a regulation on electronic digital ID and trust services. The regulation was really entered into force before it used to be a directive. It became a regulation, which means that's deployed should be deployed consistently across member states, although reality shows that we are not there in what concerns consistency. As of September 2018, the regulation states that all organizations delivering public digital services in a member state must recognize electronic identification from all EU member states that are notified. So this is an important aspect because this has an impact for NRENs, for universities, as in many countries, both NRENs and the majority of universities in Europe are delivering public digital services. They are public bodies. The notification is a process that is managed by the eIDAS Cooperation Network and basically ensures that the national eID schemes meet the quality and security requirements that are defined by the eIDAS regulation. And the number of notified schemes within countries is increasing, and I have some numbers about that as well. eIDAS is a framework, which means that there are quite a few components, as you can see. The electronic identification, so the eID part, the trust services, the signature, timestamps, seals, register delivery services, website authentication. So it's really, it encompasses a number of things. And this is the reference I put there if you want to check things, at least via this website, I get the information in a more friendly format than what you will get via other websites. What we have looked at in much details over the years is the electronic eID. And this is because clearly it enters into the space and the territory of EduGAIN, of what NRENs do nationally to identify and authenticate users electronically. a little bit some numbers about eIDAS. There are 30 countries. Actually, UK is still colored, although with Brexit, they are not anymore officially in eIDAS. But UK, the British government has agreed to continue basically they have issued a law according to which the eIDAS framework is now a part of the British law, and therefore for practical purposes they will continue to fulfill all the aspects of eIDAS, although formally they should not be on this map because they are not there anymore. There are the countries that are notified. There are 15 countries, so you can see it's a consistent, substantial number. And in some countries, particularly for instance from Italy, there are more organizations that are notified as eID schemes. One of which is the electronic eID, but there are also other entities that can issue eIDs that are recognized by eIDAS. As comparison, let's look a little bit at EduGAIN numbers to give some sense. eIDAS is very much European, although there have been several attempts to interact and discuss things at global scale with Canada, with US as well, but is, as a matter of fact, is an European law. EduGAIN, conversely, is a global infrastructure. Although it started in Europe several years ago, it is available pretty much everywhere. You see the difference, 70 identity federations. There are a high number of more than 4,000 institutions, 3,000 services. So it's really a different scale. However, when we look at EduGAIN, we focus only on on the education sector and on institutions that are member of a national NRN. Interoperability between eIDAS and EduGAIN, you can imagine that when eIDAS came out, we were all wondering, what is this about, and is this a threat or an opportunity for us? And we tried in different ways to get in touch with eIDAS, which at the very beginning was very difficult because eIDAS is managed by the member states. So the member states appoint people and appoint organizations to deal with the processes, with eIDs and so on. In some countries, there is a closer link between eIDAS and the NRNs, but it's not really a given for each country. So in 2016, we started to have meetings facilitated by the European Commission with different eIDAS representatives. However, with these meetings, we never really got very far, mostly because maybe we were too early and people on the eIDAS side would change, or they will be pulled out from the more international aspects to focus more on the national aspects. So we didn't go very far. In 2017, we looked really at a gap analysis and interoperability study to compare and identify differences between the technical aspects and policy aspects between eIDAS and EduGAIN. And in 2018, the Commission published this study, and some NRNs were also involved in the study. They were consulted actually as part of the study to assess the usage of cross-border eID to support student mobility. Student mobility became all of a sudden a very important element in the picture because it was considered a low-hanging fruit. There are pretty much all public organizations involved. It doesn't involve contracts or not contracts that are of a certain nature. It does not involve really public administration at a level where you need to have other measures in place. So all of a sudden, the Commission became very keen to enable eIDAS to support student mobility. Finally, however, it's only with my academic ID project that we succeeded and really made a change. My academic ID project was a project that ran between January 2019 and December 2020. So it's just ended, and it's funded via the CEF calls, which is also the group that manages basically eIDAS calls and funding. Why my academic ID all of a sudden enable us to do what we tried to do before? Well, first of all, it created a framework and put us as GÉANT and the NRENs in a way in the right context. So we were talking to the Commission about eIDAS in the context of an agreement, a plan, and an action to achieve something. My academic ID has been all about student mobility, outlining mobility-related use cases, designing a single interface for authenticated students to access mobility services, which are grouped as Erasmus Plus services. Then going further down on the implementation path for some of these use cases, enabling access via institutional credential, and that is via EduGAIN, and at the same time supporting citizens EAD via eIDAS. And the last part is about the identifier that is required to uniquely identify a student when the student is on mobility, which is not very relevant for this part. So back to my academic ID. We had all of a sudden this use case. The use case is we need to recognize, to identify a person for having an identity, but at the same time, we need to know that this person is also a student. So we design a blueprint architecture to support student mobility and to enable electronic access to the required services. We then looked at the option at hand, and we became aware that SUNET is operating not only the national research, not only the RNE Federation, but they are also the operator for the Swedish eIDAS node. So things became all of a sudden simpler for us, and having SUNET on board of this project accelerated the collaboration. So we designed a bridge between the Swedish eIDAS node and EduGAIN and moved that into production. And then we created a proxy, an architecture to link everything together, basically, to enable students to authenticate via EduGAIN, eIDAS, and still to access Erasmus services with one EID. So does this work in practices? Those are the services that are part of the student mobility, Erasmus Plus. We as NRENs do not control them. There is a dedicated funding for those services that is managed via DG AC. It's another digit within the commission that looks at the evolution and the framework for keeping these services up to date and supported. But the use case is pretty simple. You have students that come from a university. The university has to be accredited by the Commission to participate in Erasmus, and the students need to access these services at different stages of the workflow. It's not so important when, to go on mobility. At the end, once the student has finished the period abroad, the university where the student was for that period will transfer data, and here is also where the data part comes and plays an important factor. So this data has to be transferred back to the university where the user came from. And how do we manage to then glue all this together? So basically, we define this My Academic ID proxy, which is effectively an identity and access management service, to present one single interface to connect all services on one side, and then the important part to connect all identity providers that come via EduGAIN, so all institutions that belong to EduGAIN, as well as to allow students to use their EAD in the case they have one, and still to associate that to their affiliation and to access services. In addition, because we found the situation pre-exist, currently and before my academic ID, those services were accessed either by dedicated account on each service or using Google account mostly, which is the default fallback option. So a little bit more about the bridge. As I said, this bridge is connected to the Swedish node, and this was purely for convenience because we had the contact, we had the people, we were in touch with the operators, and because SUNET is one of the operators, is also in contact with the eIDAS cooperation network, so made things much easier. The technology is pretty simple. Is a SAML bridge that pulls in the identity of eIDAS. So the flow is also pretty simple. So let's assume that a student wants to log into the Erasmus app via eIDAS. They will go to the Erasmus app. They select I want to log in with eIDAS. They will be redirected to the eIDAS, fill in the eIDAS EID that they have been given by their country. And then at some point, there is some identity linking that has to take place. And this happens within my academic ID proxies to basically correlate the physical citizens with the student nest that comes from the identity provider. Where are we now? The academic ID identity and access platform is working. And actually there are two Erasmus services connected at the moment, and despite COVID, which you will think the students are not going on mobility, we have about 10,000 students that are accessing the platform coming from different countries. We have been talking a lot with European Commission, the CEF group, as well as we presented the work done at the eIDAS Cooperation Network. Mostly because we would like to find a more effective solution to connect, to basically scale up the infrastructure. Now you see, if I go back, everything has to go via a single point. So everything has to go via the Swedish node, no matter if a student has got an EID in Italy, they will have to first go via the Swedish node, and via which they will have to go again through their Italian node and authenticate. So there is a fair amount of clicks for the students, and the eIDAS interfaces are not necessarily super user-friendly, certainly not when you compare to Google, which is the baseline for students. Work is continuing now in another project where we are enhancing my academic ID platform, and we are continuing to work with to scale up the eIDAS bridge. We are working to make account linking much more, again, user-friendly and more robust. And we are working a lot with the federations and with the NRENs to roll out the student identifier and to find solutions also for those institutions that do not yet have an IDP functioning. So basically in a 1.5 years, we have covered a lot of ground, all the ground that we were hoping to cover in the previous year. And this is certainly a great result, not only so much for GÉANT, but first of all, for the community as a whole, and then to enable really students to access services with as low number of credentials as possible. And that's all I wanted to say. So thank you very much for listening. And if you have questions, I'll try to answer to all of them.